Hello, my name is Yaya. Thank you for tuning into Trauma and God. I know from personal experience that healing from a black cloud of trauma is possible. It just takes time. As in nature, there's always sunlight behind a cloud. So it is for us. God is light, and He's always there. We just have to find Him. In this series, I talk about things that hinder us from finding the light and things we can do that help us overcome obstacles. Today's subject is a season and time for everything. Well, I came into my marriage feeling deeply flawed. Growing up, I'd been the scapegoat in my family, so everything was my fault. Healthy shame is about recognizing what you've done wrong and changing. But I felt it was not something I had done. I came to believe that I was wrong, bad, intrinsically evil. I wasn't good enough for anyone to love. And at some point, my husband would get tired of me. I was critical of myself. My personality, appearance, behavior were all lacking in some way. I set impossibly high standards for myself. And when I couldn't reach them, it only proved how stupid and useless I was. I was highly defensive of criticism and always on high alert for being humiliated. Deep down, I knew I was a failure. I felt very ashamed about feeling ashamed. I survived by covering it up and being angry and critical, especially at my new husband. Poor man. Early on, he had no idea what was in store for him. He quickly found out and said, "This has to change." I floundered and screamed as I didn't know what or how to exchange my internal brokenness for a healthy perspective. I was alone, adrift, and without a rudder. I naively hoped that a desire to change would be enough to quickly change me fundamentally. I'd get furious with myself when I failed. Slowly, reality hit. This turnaround was going to take a long time, and I had to commit myself to the long haul. In hindsight, I see distinct seasons in my life, each one important and each focused on a particular aspect of my life, with each season bringing an important part of my healing. In this, I found I echoed the words from the Bible in the book of Ecclesiastes, chapter 3, verses 1 to 8. There is a season for everything, and a time for every delight and event or purpose under heaven. A time to be born and a time to die. A time to plant and a time to uproot what's planted. A time to kill and a time to heal. A time to tear down and a time to build up. A time to weep and a time to laugh. A time to mourn and a time to dance. Well, my first season was marriage and family, a time to build healthy foundations. There is no quick guidebook that applies to every person for how to handle marriage relationships or how to raise emotionally healthy children. These are all things we have to learn for ourselves. If you come from a healthy family dynamic, it makes the learning easier because you have some good examples to follow. My problem was that I'd grown up in such a dysfunctional family that most of what I had learned, I needed to forget. Well, during the season, I had 4 main goals. Learning how to become a good wife, learning how to be a good mother, a good cook, and learning what healthy emotions look like. Those 4 things required educating myself on each subject. I read many books on healthy marriages and raising emotionally resilient children. I started my cookbook collection. I talked with older friends who I saw had what I hoped to achieve one day. They spoke of their struggles and their victories. I recalled those loving things that I'd seen other parents do for their children, and I incorporated those into our lives. We joined the staff of a large church which hosted marriage seminars, seminars for parents with children, seminars for knowing, understanding, and understanding your gifts. We had people in and out of our home as I learned how to cook. I could seek help when I needed to, and I had lots of friends to talk to. I didn't realize it at the time, just how significant the season was for me. But God had put me in a prime location for learning what I craved to know. I took advantage of all that I could. Yet, I still felt the same inside, deeply flawed, different, evil, unlovable, ugly, crazy, and critical of myself. I still set some impossibly high standards for myself. I was both high functioning as an individual, working on learning and being an adult, yet still plagued by feeling stupid, particularly that I could never understand or get to the bottom of why I reacted as I did. Well, my next season was a time for tearing down. 25 years later, our children were married and had moved out of our home. I pined and ached for them. This loss only served to highlight other negative things I still faced. For years, I tried to apply healthy emotional choices to my life, but I couldn't get to the core of my issues. I felt lonely as my husband threw himself into his work. As I took care of others, I'd lost sight of who I was. My insecurities were running very high, and I chided myself for still being insecure and piled on the guilt. In some situations, I had very strong panic reactions. I couldn't understand why, and they embarrassed me terribly because they seemed so illogical. Was I going crazy? Well, together, my husband and I tackled what we could. We set ourselves on a course to change the dynamics of a marriage by going to counseling, and we took time to talk. This opened our eyes as to the whys and hows the bad dynamics had settled into our marriage. We were determined to do all that we could to build a healthy marriage. Well, then Mother interjected herself. Mother had once visited where we were now living, and she hated everything about that visit and said so many times, including that she would never come again. Now Mother sent an email saying how much she loved and missed me and hoped to see me soon, and said she wanted to meet her new great-granddaughter. Oh, this was odd to me, as she had shown no interest in my children, her grandchildren, or me prior to this, and hated where we lived. I chose to take what she said at face value and assume that God had changed her, and somehow she turned to loving us after all, and particularly me. I kept saying to those around me that God must have done a miracle in her heart, I was ecstatic at the thought of seeing her. We agreed to meet her where her new great-granddaughter lived. The day arrived. Mother announced that she had brought gifts for everyone, but none for my husband. A few hours into the evening, she cornered me when no one else could either see or hear, and she angrily berated me for marrying my husband. This was her old familiar mantra, which she spat out every single time I saw her. It was then that I recognized her for who she really was. All the things she'd said about loving me and wanting to see me and her great-granddaughter were a ruse. Mother had not changed one bit. God hadn't managed to change her. I had fallen into a big, fat lie. After years of counseling and working hard to not be affected by these words from her, I was instantly affected. I fell into a deep emotional black hole. I became 16 years old again and suicidal. My husband quickly got me into a residential counseling center. I just couldn't understand how I had let myself get into this turmoil so quickly. I knew better. I felt totally broken, hopeless, and abandoned by God. All my foundations crumbled and left me in great confusion as to what to do. I thought I knew what healthy looked like, but obviously I'd not learned how to properly apply the truths to myself. I had to find out. I went through an intense period of counseling. An expert had to tell me again what healthy looks like and help me to start to build a new foundation, one where I understood God's love for me and who I was. In this process, I had to be brave enough to open a door in my emotions that I had never opened before. I felt that if I did, I would be lost in a grief so intense. It would suck me under and I would never recover from it. My counselor gently encouraged me and said I was ready and she would be there for me. I opened this door and saw a 3-year-old being raped and abused by her father. It threw me into an unbelievable shock and sorrow, leaving my emotions totally raw. As I kept processing this new information with my counselor, I slowly began to feel a sense of relief that I had finally reached, looked at, and knew that I would survive having opened this door. I wouldn't drown, but I did hit rock bottom. I learned that God doesn't tell us what we long to know until the right moment, when we can deal with it and have an emotional support system necessary to sustain growth. Well, next followed a season of building up. Now no longer in intense counseling, I continued educating myself about trauma responses and PTSD. I stayed on a quest to understand myself and my symptoms. I found out that I was having reactions common to trauma. I was not alone. I was responding properly to events that had happened to me in my past, even if I had not remembered them all. And I was not going crazy. My pain was real. My pain was legitimate. and I had to learn to be nicer to myself. I saw that God was with me in the whole time and helping me through this process. I learned that my fight, flight, or freeze responses had been running high all my life. I had to learn how to relax. I just didn't know. I repeatedly told myself that I was now safe. I learned I'm not weak, but flexible and very strong. I learned that some people can be trusted, and the world is not always a dangerous place. I will never fully be healed, I don't think. I think that's a bit of a myth personally. I will always be a work in progress. I still have bad times. Each time I do, I try to strengthen myself with the skills that I've learned. I can't change what happened to me. There is no forgetting or getting over it. What I can do is turn to God and learn how to embrace my lows by not being so hard on myself, and still find a way to keep building an emotionally healthy me. It takes time to heal, and I need to learn to be patient with myself. I've learned that I can't push away my trauma memory. The more I try to push it away, the more it popped uninvited into my thinking. Therefore, I chose to deliberately invite the memory in. At first, when I was still feeling extremely raw, I could only think about my trauma occasionally. The more I've practiced this, the less raw and frightening my trauma memory has become, and the less often it pops uninvited into my thinking. Over time, it now has less of an effect on my emotions. It has become just a story that I can tell. I've learned what my triggers are. I can usually stop PTSD from happening, or if it does, I can shorten my PTSD response. I've overcome my embarrassment about having PTSD and finally told my husband my triggers. He helps me handle them. He gives me space when I need it and holds me when I ask him to. Healing is something you choose to do for yourself. And many times you are alone in it. It helps to know that others have gone through it and become healthier for it. There are no shortcuts to healing. You can't go over it, under it, around it. You have to go through it. The healing process leads you through seasons, with each season being what we can handle at that particular moment in time. We have to decide to go through that season before we can move on into the next season. One day we will arrive at the aha moment when we see that all the tearing down of the old and building up of the new is producing health. Our hard work is finally paying off. We become more at peace with ourselves and our emotions. We even become a little proud of ourselves because we know the enormous effort it took for us to get to be here in this place. Be encouraged. Stick with the healing process. It is so worthwhile. Please subscribe and tell others if you found this vlog helpful. You may email me, Yaya, at traumaandgod@gmail.com or or read my personal story, Snakes in the Loo, at Amazon Books. If this stirs things in you, please reach out and talk to a mental health professional. In the US, help is also available at the following: Suicide and Crisis Helpline, 1-800-273-TALK, or the Rape, Abuse and Incest National Network Helpline, 1-800-656-HOPE. God is for you, and so am I. I'll see you next week, next Thursday at 10. Bye for now.